going to study the concept of a web address or simply a URL address. Okay, URL stands for Uniform Resource Locator. So the full form of URL is Uniform Resource Locator. And a URL is nothing more than the address of a given unique resource on the web. Okay, so we have World Wide Web. On web, we have multiple resources. Okay, like we have web pages, we have files stored on web, we have videos stored on web, we have audios, softwares, and other files that are hosted on World Wide Web. Okay, to access a web resource, these all types of information that is stored on World Wide Web, we call them as resources. So these are resources. Okay, to access these resources, okay, so we need a URL, we need an address of the resource, and that address of the resource is called a uniform resource locator. So a URL is nothing more than the address of a given unique resource on the web. Okay, so for example, I have some file on web. That file is called, for example, myfile.mp4, and this file is hosted on sub web server. If I want to access this file, if I want to download this file through a web browser, I have to provide the URL of this resource. So URL is a way to access the resources that are hosted on World Wide Web. Okay? In theory, each valid URL points to a unique resource. Okay, so that means for every resource we have a valid URL. Okay, every URL points to a unique resource on World Wide Web. Such resources can be an HTML document, a CSS document, an image, a video, or some other file that we have already seen that different types of resources can be stored on internet. Okay, to access the resources, what we need a URL. Okay, so every resource has a unique URL. Okay, and so here we have web addresses can represent the home page of a website, for example, a script, image, photo, movie, okay, other files made available on a server for viewing, processing, or download. Okay, a URL is typed, a URL is entered in the browser window, and there we have an address bar. In that address bar, we enter the URL of a resource. So, for example, if I want to access some resource, I have to type the URL of that resource in the address bar of my browser. Okay, so for example, if I have some browser like Firefox, Internet Explorer, Google Chrome, and if I want to access some web page, for example, and to access that web page, I have to type the address of that web page in the address bar of my browser. Okay, so for example, we have a figure given here. This is the browser window. This is a browser window, and in this browser window we have an address bar. This is called an address bar where we can type an address. So this is an address bar, and we can type our URL in this address bar. So this is our URL. Okay, so this is my URL of the web page that I want to access. For example, I want to access the web page example.com index.html. To access this web page, what I have to do, I have to open the browser window, and in that browser window, I have to type the URL, and my browser will send a request to the concerned web server for that web page, and the web server will give the response, will give back the web page, or will send the web page back to the client web browser. Okay, and that web page will be displayed in my web browser. Okay, and every server on the internet has an IP number, and we can also say that every server, every computer on internet has an address, and that address is called internet protocol address. Okay, internet protocol number. That number is like, for example, 165.113.245.2. Okay, so this number contains 4 ports, and they are separated by dots. Okay, these addresses of resources, or this numeric address of web servers, they are difficult to remember. Okay, so what has been done, that these numerical numbers has been replaced by word combinations. Okay, they have been replaced by word combinations, and those word combinations, or those word based combinations, we call as word based addresses, or in short we call them as URLs. So for example, the address we have given here, that is www.example.com/index.html. This is the address of some web page. Oh, actually what is there, actually a number is there. So to type that number, or that number is difficult for me to remember. So what they have done, they have replaced the number with this URL address. So that means on the back side of this web address, on the back end of this web address, this word based address, we have some IP number, like for example 192.168.3.12. For example, this is the address of the web server where example.com is hosted. Okay, so to access this website, we have to type this number, but it is difficult to remember this number. So what has been done, these numbers are replaced by word based addresses, so that they are easy to remember. Okay, actually this IP number and this word based address, they are the same thing. Okay, and the word based address is easy for me to remember, and the IP number is not so easy, or it is difficult to remember a large group of IP based numbers. Okay, to make them easy to remember, so what has been done, those IP numbers has been replaced by word based addresses. Okay, and those word based addresses are called as URLs. They are called as uniform resource locators. Okay, a URL looks like this. So for example, this is the example of a URL. Okay, and that URL is divided into multiple sections. It is divided into multiple parts. We'll take an example. On right side we have a URL http www.google.com index.html. So this is a URL. So it's an example of a URL. Okay, so we'll understand the different parts of this URL. First part of this URL, first section of this URL is the protocol, that is hypertext transfer protocol. Okay, so what is a protocol? Protocol is actually a set of rules, okay, on the basis of which the communication is done between client and server. Okay, a web client and web server, these two entities, they work on some rules, and those rules called a protocol. Okay, so HTTP means hypertext transfer protocol. After protocol, what we have subdomain. So what is a subdomain? Subdomain is a part of domain, okay, that comes before the main domain name. So what's the main domain name here? Google. Okay, before the main domain name we have a subdomain. Okay, what are subdomains used for? Subdomains act as an extension of your main domain to help organize and navigate to different sections of your website.